Welcome to the Horse Girl Gazetteer. Join Georgia and Kate as we dive into this week's conversation. From health and fitness to communication and understanding, we are determined to develop our maps and help you to develop yours.
Hello. We have a special guest today. We have brought Olivia Testa here to talk with us about the balance through movement method and her experiences with it. It's something that one of our trainers, Savannah, introduced to me at Hideaway. And we were really excited to see that Olivia was coordinating and helping to host a clinic with one of the balance through movement instructors. So I guess, Olivia, if you wanted to kind of jump in and tell us a little bit about your story, how you came to the balance through movement method, and kind of explain how you describe what it is and why it's important.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me.
Of course.
So I found the balance through movement method probably 2 or 3 years ago after having a lot of difficulties with my horse around lameness and just things that couldn't really be defined or understood. Like it's kind of a confusing case. Nobody really could name specifically what was going on for him. Then I saw a post by like the traveling horse witch. And of course I was like, need to know more about that. Witches, horses. Yeah, I'm into it. And so I signed up for Celeste's masterclass like immediately. I read the blurb and I was just like, yep, sold. And really started diving into that and learning more about how horses should look, which was kind of a shock to my system because it felt like very new information for me. It wasn't something that like I had learned or really seen. And then just really started practicing the pillars with my horse at that time. And I think it changed how I view like how to be in relationship with horses. I think I always understood like there was more there, that it wasn't just about riding, it wasn't just about showing all of that, but that what brings us all to horses is really that deeper connection, whether we realize it or not at the time. And then, it just grew from there.
Do you want to describe just a little bit what balance through movement method is?
Yes. It's basically teaching the horse to use the muscles of self-carriage instead of bracing or being in a sort of stuck place of tension or activation. It's nervous system work for horses through various postures. If you want to name the anatomy around this, feel free, but it's so not my strength.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's so interesting and cool about it and very, I think, kind of convinced me that it was a important avenue, an important kind of missing piece in how we understand horse training, is that it brings together a lot of things I think people already are familiar with.
Yeah.
Right? So like the muscles of self-carriage, this is what every single dressage person is trying to do.
Right.
Right? Like this is the ultimate in the development of a dressage horse. This is the point. And this method is saying start there.
Right.
Instead of go there, which I think is like somewhat transformational.
Yeah.
And to some extent, we think of self-carriage as being further up the training scale in dressage. But I think that the reality is more that you're always building self-carriage from the beginning. Yeah. And that this is a way of building the idea of self-carriage, starting with the horse's nervous system at the beginning before you even get on the horse.
Right. And prioritizing connection first and foremost.
Absolutely. And I think that like that piece is another piece that people know about, that connection is important and the relationship with the horse is important. And we talk about, I think like from a dressage perspective, the ideas of contact and connection are really physical. And I think there can be a tendency to start with like the physical conversation of like the weight in the rein, the direction of the reins movement, all of this very technical stuff, which I find fascinating and love. But I think that a truth about that stems from the fact that horses don't separate physical feeling from emotional feeling is that you are talking to their emotional brain and their physical self at the same time, always.
Right.
And that, yes, the way that you physically interact is going to influence your emotional contact and emotional connection. But I think the balance through movement method says, like, you actually start that connection when you walk in the room.
Yeah.
And so, like, yes, the physical presence, there's no way to do it without the physical presence. You can't separate it. But I think our tendency in traditional training and horsemanship is a little bit to start with the physical experience and then build the kind of relationship emotional experience out of that.
Mm-hmm.
And balance through movement is saying, think about the emotional relationship and the kind of more energetic connection before you have touch, which I think is super interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I have always thought that the truest knowledge, as I'm trying to like learn about horses and horsemanship from so many people, those seeds of truth that you find in lots of places are probably the things that are most accurate or the most true. So I think it's from the Pirelli system, although I'm not sure. But have you heard the air, hair, skin, muscle, bone, like pressure and release concept?
Oh, yeah.
It starts with air, right? So
There's
this is
the energy.
like, right? So this is like a deeper understanding of that concept. And then there's like a whole other conversation about pressure and release in general as like how, when, why, etc. But that's like Pirelli, asterisk, I'm not sure, saying like it's supposed to start with energy. But we bounce right over that. We're like, air, it's not working.
Mm-hmm.
And I think balance and movement is saying, no, like live there for a minute.
Right.
Spend some time there. Like foster that as your starting point, which I think is like transformational and really cool for the people who, like you're saying, we all come to this for that desire for connection.
Right.
Which is really neat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a comfortable place. I think that was part of what drew me to it. It's a comfortable place for me is the energy of it and the feeling of it.
Yeah.
And made my time with my horse where I couldn't ride him so fruitful.
Totally.
And yeah, I wouldn't change that at all.
I'm really interested right now in this whole like story arc of, you know, we're kids and this is like, we had a unicorn festival a few weeks ago.
That's amazing.
which could be seen as like, oh, it's just like carnival pony rides, right? Overworked, poorly muscled, you know, at least, you know, I'm sure in some cases they're fine, but you know, it's not about connection. It's another fair ride, right? They are a tool for recreation. Right. They're a means to an end. And that's long been the history of horses. Mm-hmm. So that event could be seen in that light. But the way I saw it and the purpose for me in having that is that I think there's this like this magic and this mystery and like this beauty and love that these little girls, mostly in their little costumes, they all came in costumes with all the pink tulle and just like the very unadulterated joy of being in the presence of our horses that I think we all have. Mm-hmm. We all started there.
Yes.
And like how quickly in the story does that turn into riding lessons?
Yeah. And then what's next and what's after that?
And then what's next? Exactly. And that kind of dream and that fantasy and that story turns into like, okay, what's the next goal? Mm-hmm. And it turns into ride the horse immediately.
No matter what, just ride.
And just ride. And all of that, I think that joy kind of gets pushed away and pushed back and deprioritized. And then the horse gets deprioritized because the focus becomes our own goals, which is challenging.
It is.
You know?
It really is, especially when that has been the norm for so long.
Totally. Did you feel that when you were kind of struggling with Cannoli and working through his soundness? And I think, you know, knowing you to some extent, your work with horses has been more in a therapeutic realm often as well. So I would imagine that was maybe less of a pressure for you.
Yeah, it was less pressure internally, but I still, just being at different boarding facilities, like you hear that external chatter of like, oh, just ride, or just different perspectives on that. So yeah, of course, there were times where I was like, I should be riding my horse, or I should be doing this, or should be doing that. But if I was really listening to what was happening, then that was not at all what I should be doing.
Yeah.
And that's tough. It's like tough to go against the grain and to do things your way, especially when people are like, you're just being anxious, or there's, like there's a lot. Horse people are so opinionated. Like
Of
they're
course.
not shy about
No.
being like, this is what you should be doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely came up against that quite a bit. And then ultimately I think settled into, especially with balance through movement method, because it was like, I'm still doing great work right now. I'm doing more for him than I could be otherwise.
Yeah.
So it really gave me like a system to stick to.
Yeah.
And that was
and
helpful.
a different culture.
Yes.
Like a different framework for how you think about your relationship with your horse that's not prioritizing riding.
Right.
And that's not to, I mean, I love riding. Like
Same.
My special interest as like a horse person is in the kind of the biomechanics and the dynamics of the horse and rider interaction. And that's like, I love that stuff. But I don't want to do that at the expense of the horse.
Right. You're not going to ride a broken horse. You're not going to ride a horse that can't sustain that.
Yeah. And I think that the balance through movement method is kind of a gift to all of these horses in helping people to be better listeners by developing their eye.
Yes.
And being able to understand what they're seeing and how that relates to what they're doing and what their horse is doing.
I feel like before I found BTMM, I could look at a horse and be like, I don't know, like something just doesn't quite seem right.
Yeah.
I didn't understand. Like I had no idea why I felt that way.
Yeah.
And then now you can't unsee it.
Right.
Now I'm like, oh God.
No.
None of these horses should be. No, that's not true. But
yeah,
you see some horses being ridden that probably shouldn't be.
Yeah. According to that way of thinking.
Right.
Yeah.
For myself, growing up, I grew up with horses. You wouldn't know this, but my mom had a lesson barn when I was like 2. So I've like grown up with horses my whole life. And I remember being like 14 or 15, because I had gone to a couple of different barns at that point, and being like, I don't know anything about conformation. Like I had this realization as a teenager that I had never been taught actually what to look for in a horse. And like, I kind of like you would be like, well, there's something off about that one. But like, and it was never concretely explained. And like, then I did my own research to be like, all right, what the heck is conformation? How do I look at this? And so I learned more about that, but through doing like the pillar work and the balance through movement here, I'm like, oh, well, now I'm not just looking at conformation. I'm also looking at like posture.
Right.
And like that becomes a whole different conversation, because like, I mean, you can look at a human being and tell pretty easily if they have good posture or not, because we like know what that looks like. But a lot of people don't know what good posture looks like for a horse, which actually I would love for you to like explain a little bit. What does good posture look like for a horse? Like if you're looking at a horse now, what are your green flags?
Green flags?
Or red flags, if that's easier.
I don't know. I feel like it's different for every horse.
Yeah.
Because what you were just saying, like you can't change their conformation, right? But you can support their posture. So right now, I feel like what I like to see in horses is just a soft, relaxed neck, a nice like low head, not too low. That's about it that I can think of right now.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that when you look at a horse without their tack on, right, you take the saddle off and look at what's under the saddle.
Yeah.
One of the principles in the pillar work, as I understand it, is that we're thinking about the thoracic sling and the fact that it's not attached by bones, right. And they have a lot of soft tissue and muscle in the front of their body. And so if they have poor posture, if they're in their bracing muscles, that's going to be very collapsed.
Right.
And then the spine is going to be in kind of a negative posture. So you can look at the rib cage and see, like, is the rib cage level with the ground or is it tipped down in the front? And that's something I look at. And then if they're collapsed up front, Stacia, who did the clinic we were talking about, talks about it's like pushing a wheelbarrow that doesn't have any air in the tires. And it's just really awful.
Yeah.
It's really uncomfortable and hard. And the point of the pillar work is using these exercises of movement through correct posture to kind of inflate those tires,
right?
Lift the front end of the horse, give them the ability to lift the muscles in their chest and in their front end, pump up those tires, and then bring them back into balance. The idea being that until you do that, they can't access their hind end either.
Right. You have
and
to
then
start.
All the same principles of dressage apply, which is like you ride the horse from back to front, but if the front end is in what could be called thoracic sling failure, there's not much you can do about it.
Yeah. So that like wider stance up front is what they're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she pointed out all those different areas where you could see like tension lines and just lack of muscling where they probably should have muscling because there's dysfunction.
Yeah. Pocket behind the shoulder blade. I think that's really common. Those big pointy outy withers can be conformational, but they can also be because there's no muscle of the back.
Right. Little muffin tops.
Muffin tops. So she was talking about fat pads. And that some horses that like, well, they're like not really, really fat, but it looks like they have fat pads around their shoulder. It's actually the flesh that's supposed to be inside their shoulder, inside the shoulder blade, because the shoulder blades are too close together. It's like squishing it out.
Forcing it out.
That was really interesting.
Yeah. I did not know that before. And that was super helpful to see because cannoli had those and I would always be like, what's going on? Like, you're not fat. What is this? Well,
Yeah, really interesting.
Pushing the wheelbarrow without any air in the tires. That's what that is.
It's interesting to see how much change just a session in pillar work has on a horse. I have one horse that is struggling with various health issues and soundness issues. And some days I look at him and I'm like, wow, he looks really skinny. Mm-hmm. And I brought him in the other day and I did 20 minutes of this postural work. And he looked like he put on 50 pounds of rib cover.
Wow.
20 minutes. And that's from this idea of like you take the horse out of their bracing posture and put them into a posture that's more relaxation and you take the tension off.
Right.
Everything.
He probably could just breathe and then he was able to
Yeah.
expand.
Yeah.
Because there's so much contraction happening when they're in that dysfunction.
Totally. That's really cool.
That's really cool.
That's really, really cool.
Which I think speaks to the importance of this work too, because you as a trainer have never been somebody who's not mindful of your horse's health.
Right.
Like you're very mindful of your horse's health and you like always put your horse first. And like you have said through this stuff, you have seen monumental change in a lot of your horses. So like, even if you're doing everything right, in quotes, and like following every single thing you're supposed to do for your horse's health, like you can, like, this isn't saying that anybody's doing it wrong. You need to add it.
Yeah.
Right.
There's just more that you can do.
There's always more. Yeah. Which is, I think, an interesting thing to talk about a little bit because I have put riding on hold for all of my horses for the last 3 or 4 weeks. I have lesson horses. They're ridden by people who don't sit well because that's part of the learning process is that you don't sit well until you sit better.
Right.
And there's no way to learn to ride that doesn't involve sitting badly for a while. And that's okay. Mm-hmm. But it is hard on the horses if that's most of what they experience. Mm-hmm. And so I think I see this as a way to support my horses from the ground and make sure that they are actually fit enough posture-wise, not just like reps at the gym wise. I mean, it is reps at the gym really in terms of the postural muscles to be able to carry my riders in a way that's not at their expense, which is pretty tough, right? Because it's like, well, I can walk, trot, canter, Sparky, but should I? He has some quirks that are annoying. He doesn't really want to trot on. So you have to use the crop sometimes more than would be really great. And then his canter departs are pretty choppy sometimes. They're very prompt, but there's kind of a big lurch. If you pull on his mouth too much, right, that your hands are not steady and you ride with your hands, he'll try to drag you out of the saddle because he throws his head down as hard as he can against you. I've always known, like, well, I need to teach him to go better through his body. I need to, it's hard to find time to do that riding, to explain to him a different understanding of the bridle. But with this work, I can look at his back and go, no wonder he's trying to drag him out of the saddle. He's completely stuck between, the rider's hands and the fact that his back is totally stuck in a compensation pattern.
Right.
And this gives me some tools, which are really very easy.
So easy to build that from the ground and put him in a position where he can have a totally different experience. Mm-hmm. But that's a little bit of a tough pill to swallow. Yeah. I mean, I was just going to say it's so beautiful and like amazing that you give them the space to have breaks and to not be ridden all the time. And like you also have people who want to learn to ride. You're running a program.
Right. Yeah.
Like you're just doing your best.
Yeah.
There's no perfect solution, I don't think.
No, I think being thoughtful is important.
Right.
And trying to attract people who are in it for the horse.
Yep.
and to educate people. Because I think I don't think I get anybody who comes in and is like, well, I'd like to abuse a horse today.
Absolutely.
You know, like, there's nobody who's walking in the door with that intention.
No.
There are some people who I think maybe aren't totally authentic with their intention. And they're like, yeah, of course, the horse, but I haven't been riding for the entire hour.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, that's not about the horse.
Right.
But I think generally people assume that what you're teaching them isn't bad for the horse.
Mm-hmm.
And they want to know that. And people are often, sometimes it's hard for people to be assertive because they don't want to be mean.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a piece of this that's education as far as like teaching people at, when they're 11 that like, yes, we're going to practice our riding skills, but we're also going to learn how to listen to the horse.
Mm-hmm.
And being nice means being assertive, but being nice also means developing your eye and being able to see everything we've been talking about, which I kind of hope over time will start to shift the culture around how we understand horses and interact with them.
I hope so.
Yeah.
And we have people like you who are already doing it. So
little bits at a time.
That's a big deal.
I mean, it is working. Like I've been doing like some interviews with boarders here at Hideaway as like testimonial interviews for you. And almost everybody has said like you can tell that Kate is here for the horses.
Mm-hmm.
And most people have also said something along the lines of everybody is here for the horses and everybody here is willing to do it. And that they identified that as a difference between Hideaway and a lot of other places.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's no small feat in the horse world.
No, it was so sweet to just hear it. Like I've loved doing these interviews because I've just heard it over and over and over again now. And I'm like, yay.
That's amazing.
It's so good. And I also think that I don't think that people think of groundwork very much. Like I grew up as groundwork was you start by teaching manners on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
The horse will respect your space. The horse will walk nicely with you. The groundwork is to develop manners.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get in the saddle to do the rest of the stuff. And so I have always felt more comfortable working through an issue in the saddle than on the ground. And Jules has made me completely relook at that because I can't really ride him right now because he's not balanced enough for it. And if I didn't have these new tools in my toolbox, I'd be like, what do I do now? Like, if I can't ride him through it, what am I supposed to do? Like, and it would probably, my instinct would have been to like hand walk him up and down some hills, which would have been moving in this direction kind of naturally. But having the tools to stand still and work on things that are changing the shape of his body, so much better.
Yeah, you're just being with them. It's a total shift. It's taking some of the like goal-oriented or result-driven energy out of it. I think that's hard for humans, but I think it can also be challenging for horses too, who are used to having a job, used to having a role, to then just be like, we're just going to hang out. We're just going to be together. It's a big shift, especially when you're used to, like you said, just get on, just ride through it. Like that's what you were taught to do.
Yeah. Even if a horse was like spooky about something, I mean, I grew up riding ponies, so I grew up with a very good seat. So if a horse was spooky about something, I'd be like, well, I don't want to be on the ground near those feet. I'd much rather be up in the saddle, like away
God, that's
from
so
those
funny.
feet.
I'm the exact opposite.
No, I've always, well, this has shifted. I had a really bad fall a few years ago, which has shifted this. But historically, I would always rather be in the saddle than on the ground. If the horse was going to be freaking out, I'd be like, well, I can stay. I can stick if I'm in the saddle. They might hit me in the head if I'm on the ground. No, thank you. I'd like to be as far away from the feet as possible. But again, this has like changed that. Like this and in tandem with like the harmony horsemanship stuff and working on the calm connection exercises, I'm like, oh wait, actually I have far more tools on the ground.
Absolutely.
To deal with this. Yeah. I'm way more likely to jump off now if a horse is spooking at something.
Yeah.
Both out of self-preservation and for their sake.
How nice to be effective on the ground and feel that you can be effective on the ground.
Yeah. And it eliminates so many problems under saddle. There's just like so much less drama. There's very little need to ride through anything if you've already had a conversation and they understand. I mean, horses, the drama comes from either they're uncomfortable or they don't understand.
Yeah. And then think about like your nervous system when you're on a horse that's feeling that way. Like it's very hard for you to stay as regulated as maybe you need to be in order to see that through. And then you just, you're not set up for success in that
Right.
way.
Which is something we talked about last week. We just did an episode about anxiety and how you feed off of each other's anxiety.
Yes.
So this is a tool to work through that in a very safe way. Because if you're both just standing there, there are very few things to be anxious about.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think we talked a little bit earlier about horses don't feel feelings separately. Their physical feelings, like sensation, and their emotional feelings are one and the same, which I think is related to how their nervous system works. So if we're in the pillar work, right, we're talking to the entire nervous system, both physically and emotionally, and bringing them out of their fight and flight posture, which is the head up, back down. You suck everything
see the
in.
tension.
You can see the tension. Just like protect my core anatomy.
Yes.
Run away fast. And then moving them, their body and their whole nervous system into their rest, digest, relaxed. Head down, we're grazing, we're hanging out, floppy lips, blinky eyes, all of those relaxation signals in order to be able to turn on the self-carriage muscles. And all of that is so powerful in, the point of dressage being, let's gymnasticize the horse. Let's take them from their natural balance into better balance. Like, to me, that's the point of dressage, is to be my horse's physical therapist, basically, and to be able to bring them into better movement. And especially if you are dealing with a horse that's like spooky or whatever, that's maybe it's an emotional discomfort,
Right.
but maybe there's a physical piece to it. And this is such a great tool for being able to get in there, figure out what it is.
I really liked too how Stacia was talking about like downloading the program for them, that some of them maybe haven't even really ever experienced this more relaxed, regulated state. And you're just like helping them have that program for themselves so that even if you're not with them, they can access that with ease.
Yeah.
Eventually.
It's really cool to see them doing the turnout.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you texted me and you were like, Jules is kind of practicing pillar 1 in the paddock, I was like, yes, it's worth it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because
really
you downloaded
cool.
the system for him.
Yeah.
He doesn't do it often, but when he does, celebration.
And I think we can all kind of relate to that. If you've been in stressful situations in your life over and over and over and over and over again, your brain is just going to default to like that particular pattern of like neuron firings of like, this is the pattern of how I cope with things, is tension and stress, and then it's hard to not do that. Like, it's hard to be like, I'm gonna now relax, jittering like vibrating over here. Oh, I'm relaxing. It's like I try to take a bath sometimes, and I get in the bathtub and I'm like, now what? What am I supposed to be doing now?
What do I do?
What do I do? Right?
Because you're hardwired to be.
I'm hardwired,
to be doing
things.
Yeah.
And it is so hard to stay in the bathtub. I'm so good at crisis. Terrible at relaxing.
My partner recently called me out on this because we were talking about ways to spend more time together. And they were like, well, we should go on walks together. I'm like, but when we go for a walk, we're not going anywhere. So why would I go for a walk? And they're like, to go outside? And I was like, but we're not going anywhere. Like, there's no destination. What's the point? And like, I've loved hiking my whole life. And there's a point. You're getting to the top of the mountain.
Right.
And like, I was like, go for an aimless, like, why would I go for an aimless walk? And then I was like, wait, maybe I need to do some self-reflection on this.
Right. What is a reward to you? Like, you like the achievement of making it to the top of the mountain, but actually like going for a walk will internally reward you. It's just less tangible. It's not as big of that, like, I did it.
Right.
Has longer term effects.
Yeah. Which is funny.
Yeah.
I was thinking about the balance your movement method as like such a big support for horses that are like behavioral, and how that is shifting in the horse world, where we're having conversations like nothing is really just behavioral. It's always a call for help or some kind of communication. And I'm a therapist, so I see like the same shift happening with people too. Like this diagnosis, like ODD used to be like oppositional defiant disorder, was like tossed out all the time for kids that were behavioral. And it's like the laziest diagnosis you could possibly give to somebody, because it's not taking into account like trauma or external factors or anything like that. And I feel like we are making those shifts both with humans and horses right now. And I really feel like BTMM helped support that shift, because it's like, it explains clearly like, look at this body. Look at why this horse may be having these behavioral problems. And it also targets, like we were saying before, the energetic and emotional piece as well, which like is totally where I lean into. But also, like you were saying, you were sold on it because it was like, oh yeah, this makes sense. This isn't just like all the feelings. It's like there's structural integrity to the work too.
Yeah. It increases accountability. It doesn't excuse anyone, including the horse.
Yes.
From accountability, because I think it can be easy to fall into the trap of like, well, it's just everything's fine. It's nobody's fault.
Yes.
It's like really, I don't want to. No, it's like structure and boundaries, and successful relationships are not about like always giving.
No,
right? It's about like a back and forth. It's about
security,
having security in yourself.
Yeah.
And like allowing the horse to have security in themselves. And how can they be secure in themselves if they're in a compensation pattern that's limiting their ability to function? So we're giving them the ability to be a whole being and be secure in themselves to be able to be in a successful relationship, which like there's a life lesson.
Absolutely. Because there's reciprocity. Like,
Totally.
I mean, I'm thinking back, obviously my horse was struggling for a long time, and like energetically there was reciprocity. Like I got so much from being with him, but I was essentially like a caregiver for a very long time. And that's exhausting and depleting. And this work certainly helped that, but that relationship like was not always secure. We were not always okay on our own, and it was quite the story to like move in and out of that. And to learn, I think I learned a lot about like healthy relationships through that.
Yeah, I think I've talked a few times now about how my relationship with Jules is very different from my relationship with my childhood pony. And as you were talking about this shift from like things are like nothing's purely behavioral. Like my pony was always a very good boy. He would always do whatever I asked of him. But there were several times where we were just like, oh, he's just being a pony. He's just being a punk. And like looking back, I'm thinking about the way that he moved. And I mean, he was trained as a hunter jumper in the early 2000s when they wanted their heads kind of right up in the air. So he was absolutely trained into a fight or flight stance. And I'm thinking about it and I'm like, I wonder how much more willing he would be and how much more he would have done if I or my mom or whatever had this knowledge base to get him to like release that and let go. Because I tried doing some dressage with him. He had a little kid who was leasing him for a while, and they were eventing. So I tried to put some like basic dressage principles on him, and he was like, screw you. Like, what are you doing right now? This is weird. This goes against everything. That's because at that time he was like 15. His whole life had been encouraged to have it set up in the air. So he was like, that seems dangerous to let my guard down like that. No, thank you.
Isn't it interesting to look back and notice the things that you just didn't know then? I feel like though the best part of that is that now you get to honor what you've learned like through Jules, and you get to do it differently. And I feel like that's really healing for, I don't know if that pony is still with us or
he
not.
Is.
Okay.
He's now my little brother's pony.
Okay. So he can see you making those changes too.
And he does, I will say, he walks around with his head a lot lower now, which is great. He's kind of done that on his own because he's just been a pasture puff for several years now.
Good
he
for
has
him.
first horse privileges. He's never going anywhere. He just gets to do whatever he wants and be fat in the pasture.
He deserves it.
He absolutely deserves it. Kate can confirm. She's heard some of the stories. He definitely deserves it.
And it's hard to let go of the way you learned.
So hard.
Yes.
Like, as hard as it is for the horses to let go of, like, let their guard down, it's like, it is a real place of vulnerability. I think there's a certain amount of courage in being willing to be like, I could do this better now that I know, like now that I know better, I have to do it better.
Yeah.
And it's expensive and it costs a lot of time and it requires a lot of, like, you have to be willing to be like, didn't do that great, like,
yeah, it's super vulnerable.
And that's a hard place to be. I think that is a barrier sometimes to people making progress is that, well, you don't want to admit that you were wrong, to put it most simply,
Right.
And it's not even that necessarily what you were doing was wrong per se, but that,
it's like I said earlier, there's another piece.
There's a new level.
You just were doing what you knew.
Yeah. And there has to be some grace,
yes,
I think,
yes,
for yourself, and some fairly profound acceptance of process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that there's not going to be a reward per se, like almost immediate. I mean, sometimes, you know, you have those sessions like you did where you see it.
Yeah.
But it's a process and it's a lot of unwinding and it takes time.
It all takes so much time.
And sometimes it doesn't turn out the way that you thought it might or that you hoped it would.
Yeah.
A couple episodes ago, you and I were talking about, like, what would our 10-year-old selves think if we saw us today? And in several ways, my 10-year-old self would be like, oh my God, that's so cool.
Yeah.
But also my 10-year-old self would be like, what do you mean you're not riding your horse? Like, you're not showing? We were supposed to be going, like, at least training by now.
Yes.
Like, what are you doing with your life? And I'm like, well, so better. Doing better. Actually, kiddo, let's have a conversation. You need to change some stuff now.
Right.
Get ahead of it.
My 10-year-old self would be like, oh my God, you're such a wimp. Like, you're so tender. You cry all the time. Like, yep.
Yeah.
That's me now. You don't have to be so tough, just so you know.
I was talking to a friend, which is where this came from, and they were like, what would your 14-year-old self think of you today? And I was like, I don't need to impress that kid. I was like, she has a lot to work through.
Yes.
And she does not, nope. She doesn't need any impressing. Actually, if she's disappointed in me, I think I'm doing something right.
There you go.
Because, like, 14-year-old me would be like, we jumped a picnic table yesterday. What are you doing?
Oh my God, somebody else was just telling me how they jumped picnic tables as a kid, and I was like, what? In what
Terrible
world?
Idea. Terrible idea. Don't do it. Picnic tables, wheelbarrows.
No.
On the pony.
Mm-mm.
He's 12 and a half hands. 12 and a half hand pony flying over a wheelbarrow. In the dark, actually.
Oh.
Yeah. That was one of my friends who did that one. But yeah.
Maybe I was talking to your friend. Sorry.
Yeah.
Possibly. She's everywhere.
I was just going to say, I guess I was lucky because the riding instructor that I had as a child, who I still am connected with now, one of her favorite little sayings was, discretion is the greater part of valor.
Ooh.
So there was a pretty big emphasis on, like, if the horse is a little unsound, we don't ride the horse.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's something that's not going right with the horse, we put them away and try again another day.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I had that very early priority in my life, which I'm grateful for.
Absolutely. That's
Very, very grateful for. And I think as I learn more subtlety and more tools for how that works and what that looks like with the horses.
My mom was for sure pretty good about that. Like, she was like, she was somebody who was like, we always have to end on a win, which is something that I don't fully agree with anymore. But, like, she would be like, sometimes the win is you get on.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if they won't stand at the mounting block, sometimes the win is you throw your foot over them and then you get right back off and you put them away again. And if you're planning to ride for an hour, oh well, you spent an hour trying to get on the horse and that's your win and now you're done.
Yeah. But I think that's the evolution is how do you classify a win?
Right. No,
right?
100%.
Like, that rule kind of still applies, but now is the win that you do the thing you meant to do, or is the win that you were acting in a way that was consistent with your values, or was the win that your horse was happier at the end of the day, or the win, like, you get to define your win.
It reminds me of the 4 agreements. The 4th agreement is always do your best, and your best looks different day to day, moment to moment. Like, there's not just one way to describe that.
Yeah.
As long as you're living in integrity and following your values, then you're doing your best.
Yeah. Well, I came home one day from the barn. It was like a couple months ago, like when I had first started doing the pillar work stuff with Jules. And I was like almost in tears because I was so frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
And it just like hadn't gone well. And he was not having it that day. And he was like, screw you. I'm uncomfortable. I don't want to be here. Like, and
those are fun days.
He's so sweet. What it looked like was he just wasn't engaging in it.
Yeah.
That's all it was. And like, cause he's such a good boy, but I was like so frustrated that I couldn't get anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like put him away and I went home and I was like almost in tears talking to my partner. They're like, you're saying that you didn't have a win, but like you went to the barn and you did the thing.
Mm-hmm.
You got there. And even if it didn't go the way you wanted it to, like, do you feel like you got something out of it? And I was like, well, it was a very different, frustrating situation that I've historically had, which has ended with me in a ditch or like something along those lines. So, all right. And they're like, so that like, you're doing better than you were. I was like, all right. I'm not completely sold, but yeah.
It's so important to have people who reframe stuff like that for us.
Yes.
I feel like that's another big part of this is like, we can't do this alone. Like, we need support. We can't do horses alone, first of all. Like, it's just not possible.
Happen.
But then to start doing things differently and looking at things differently and being honest or being courageous, Like you need a team of people that are going to support you and have those conversations with you and say like, hey, hold on. Like from my perspective, this actually does look like a win. Yeah. This is a major win based on, past experiences or whatever it might be.
Right.
Support is so crucial.
Like have those conversations about like, what are you thinking? What are you trying to do? Who are you trying to be?
Yeah.
How are you trying to be in the world? We've had those conversations about Jules a little bit sometimes.
We have. Yeah.
I
was just going to ask if there's a particular one that's coming to mind.
No. I was just thinking about like, just talking about how we interpret him and his behavior and how we interpret, like we talked about in the anxiety episode, interpreting what your anxiety about riding him was saying, which changed over time because it was initially anxiety about the possibility of falling off of him.
Yes. And
it turned into his anxiety.
Yes.
Is that you were actually feeling anxiety that wasn't yours.
Yes.
It was his anxiety because he couldn't balance you.
Yes. It was very unsteady.
Which we learned when I got on and I was like, good news.
Like it made sense to you that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I got on and I was like, well, no wonder you feel anxious. It's because he doesn't know if he has 4 legs.
Okay.
He has somewhere between 1 and 12.
We don't know.
So then there was that validation.
Right.
Oh.
So then there was like, we'd be like, the good news is that you're right to be anxious and that's completely reasonable. And it's not you, really. That like this is the source of that. The bad news is
you're right.
He doesn't know where his legs are.
He doesn't know where his legs are. We need to show him where his legs are again.
Yeah. Which the like pillar work, like we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, but a week later, Kate was like, oh my God, he has a top line. Where did that come from?
That's amazing.
And yesterday, this is like a month into it now, but yesterday Savannah was like, Georgia, he looks great. And I was like, yes, that's a win.
Hell yeah, it is.
Like I love people who are hard to impress with things, and Savannah's very picky. And so like having her tell me that he looked good, I was like, it's all worth it. That was my win. That was my win for the day.
That was the golden nugget.
Yeah.
I'm really glad that it's helping him.
Me too.
Yeah, it's very cool.
It's helping everybody. If people are interested in learning more about this and want to get into it, where do you recommend they start? Where do they look for resources?
They can go to Celeste's website. I don't know it off the top of my head.
We can link it in the description.
You can link it.
Yeah.
And you can sign up for the masterclass there. And then I think you need to be a part of the masterclass to work with one of the trainers. But if that's not true, I'm not sure. You could also just schedule a session with one of the trainers virtually.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for chatting with us about this.
Thank you for having me.
It's fun.
Well, talk to you later. Thanks for joining us this week at the Horse Girl Gazetteer. You can find us online at Horse Girl Gazetteer on Facebook or Instagram, and Horse Girl Gazette on TikTok and Patreon. You can also email us questions or comments at horsegirlgazetteer@gmail.com. Georgia can be found at LOL_itsGeorgie on Instagram, and Kate can be found at Hideaway Acres on Facebook and at Hideaway Acres Horse Farm on Instagram. If you find yourself enjoying our content, please leave us a review and share the link with your friends to help them find their way to us. We appreciate any and all support. Talk to you later.